So let's look at the privity of the contract doctrine. Privity of contract doctrine holds that only parties directly involved in the contract can enforce its terms or sue for its breach. So this doctrine is based on the principle that a contract is a bargain between those who participated in it, and anyone who wasn't involved in the contract, for example a stranger to the contract, cannot sue or be sued under it, even if the contract benefits them. So this was expressed in the case of Dunlop versus Selfridge in 1915. So Dunlop, who was the plaintiff, sold tires to Dew and Company, and they agreed to sell the tires below a certain price. So Dew and Company also sold the tires to Selfridge. So Selfridge also agreed to sell tires below a certain price, but Selfridge later did not act according to those terms. So Dunlop went ahead and sued Selfridge for the breach of the contract. So court observed that the plaintiff had no right of action because no consideration moved from Selfridge to them. So Dunlop had no right to sue Selfridge because Selfridge was not directly involved in their contract. At first, the contract was between Dunlop and Dew and Company. So Dew and Company sold the tires to Selfridge. So Dunlop had no right to sue Selfridge because Selfridge was not directly involved in their contract at first. So this case brings out the legal principle of privity of contract doctrine, showing that only parties involved in the original agreement can enforce actions to the privity of contract. And the first exception that we have is agency. So for the agency, it is always the agent that contracts with the third parties. So in this case, even though the principal is not directly involved in the contract, the principal can sue and can be sued on a contract made by his agent. So agency is an exception to the privity of contract doctrine. Then another exception we have is the bill of exchange. So the bill of exchange, a person who holds a negotiable instrument, for example a check, for value can sue prior parties on that instrument even though they were not part of the contract. For example, if A buys goods from B and pays with a check which B endorses and transfers to C, so C can sue A if the check is dishonored even though C was not part of the original agreement between A and B. So in case of a bill of exchange, the person who was not directly involved in the contract can sue and can be sued.